900 micrograms. Background. One of my best friends, Isaiah, and I were planning on using 25I-NBOMe for the second time together. It was also his first time using any hallucinogen/psychedelic discounting cannabis. It was my 9th time using 25I-NBOMe, although I have used other psychedelics such as magic mushrooms and morning glory seeds, as well as hallucinogens of other classes such as DPH and Dramamine deliriants and DXM dissociative. Isaiah is a regular dextroamphetamine user and an occasional marijuana user. Last time we tripped together, his first time tripping, my second time tripping on 25I, was in September of 2012, where we each took 1200 UGs of 25I and had an awful, entirely manic trip. He thought I was sane, and because he was losing it and I didn't know how to handle someone having a bad trip, especially while tripping so hard myself, I became very over-controlling and acted completely insane myself. Anyways, on to the story. The beginning of the experience was recorded by me in a notebook. I changed everything to past tense to avoid confusion, but at a certain point I stopped recording, and the time at which certain events happen, as well as some of the events themselves, is foggy, so I begin estimating the times after the entry at 12:03. The trip took place at my house. My parents were still home, I am still living with them, and my sister had just gone back from college for summer vacation. I had a 25I experience exactly 1 week previous to this one, but it seemed that I had zero tolerance, possibly due to the trip being my first serotonergic psychedelic experience in more than 2 months. I had a wonderful marijuana-induced nap earlier in the day and was very well rested when I drove to pick up Isaiah and brought him to my house at around 8 p.m. We talked for a while, watched Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and played Grand Theft Auto 4 while I downloaded some movies onto my Xbox and set up a playlist for the trip. We wanted to wait for my parents to go to bed to begin the trip. In my experience, marijuana tends to cloud 25I trips, and so I put away my pipe and stash, a change from when I usually trip. 10:33 p.m. After gathering things I think we might need in my basement, and after both of us have used the bathroom, we each drop half a tab, 600 UGs of 25I-NBOMe. My parents hadn't fallen asleep yet, but I know they would soon. I turned on the first SpongeBob movie. A person on a forum had recommended watching this movie while tripping. 10:40 p.m. I talked to my girlfriend on the phone for a couple of minutes before she goes to bed. 10:53 p.m. I began to feel a possible buzz. Typing on my phone started to become difficult. However, both of these effects could be attributed to placebo or pre-trip anxiety/incitement. Isaiah complained about slight discomfort in his knees, which could very well have been vasoconstriction, a commonly experienced side effect on both the 2C chemicals and their NBOMe counterparts. I start to play Pokemon Diamond on my DS to pass the time and to distract myself from thinking about whether I'm feeling the impact of the chemical. 11:03 p.m. It has been half an hour since administrating this 25I-NBOMe, and both Isaiah and I agreed that we felt the drug. I had a sort of light, almost weightless energy to my movement and thought process. This feeling is something that occurs on the come up of all my 25I experiences. 11:13 p.m. There was no doubt that I was under the influence of the RC. I was beginning to notice visuals and had a strong buzz. Isaiah was talking to a girl he had/has a romantic interest in on Skype. I felt almost obliged to advise and assist him in his growing relationship. I felt that I had more romantic experience than him, with this being his first romantic relationship, despite him having sexual, but not at all romantic, relationships with several women previous to her. I could feel how much he wanted/wants the relationship to work, and it reminded me of myself about a year and a half ago at the beginning of my relationship with my current girlfriend. This chemical has strong empathogenic effects, and I was feeling very good vibes from every aspect of the situation we were in. I wasn't following the SpongeBob movie at all. 11:30 p.m. Isaiah told the girl that he's tripping too hard to have a good Skype conversation and asked if they can just talk the next day. She said yes, and they said goodnight to each other. I felt very proud of this friend of mine for his involvement with this girl and told him that I approve of her. I felt that he would appreciate my verification of his life choices and that he would feel encouragement from my good first impression of the girl. He says that she seemed too calm and almost angry. Apparently she usually is a very energetic person. I was watching the Skype conversation for a good portion of it and assured him that she wasn't angry and told him that I could see that she was/is really into him. He seemed to believe me and stopped worrying about it. We watched SpongeBob for a few minutes, but both agreed that it was giving some bad vibes and had a surprisingly sinister feeling to it, despite being a children's show/movie that we were both familiar with. We decided that it was a bit too negative to watch on the intense come-up that 25i has, and began playing Grand Theft Auto 4 again instead. My parents had gone to bed at this point. 12:03 a.m. Isaiah and I were tripping pretty hard. We both were seeing patterns on the ceiling and carpet, and this was odd. We were both seeing the patterns take the same shape. At first it was cat faces, something I had seen on 2 of my other 25i trips, and then it was outlines of turtles as though viewed from above. The patterns pulsed rhythmically while they seemed to shift through different colors of the rainbow. The walls and especially the blinds were breathing heavily. There was minimal color enhancement, although the world's color palettes seemed to increase in contrast, as though someone had went into Photoshop and made all the darks darker and the brights brighter. We found ourselves unable to navigate efficiently through Liberty City, the place that Grand Theft Auto 4 takes place. However, the game was incredibly beautiful and looked almost photorealistic, despite us noticing how easy it was to spot the repetition of skins in-game, on the city streets, and in the grass. 12:20 a.m. I felt as though we were getting close to peaking. The visuals were getting increasingly strong, the edges of the TV didn't appear to be the edge of the game, and the pictures on the screen spread out beyond the borders of the television, but not too far, and boring more into the area around the further it was from the screen. 12:40 a.m. It was impossible to direct ourselves around the city in GTA, although our skill level as far as driving and firing a gun in-game didn't seem to decline. I grew tired of the game and tried to convince Isaiah to watch a movie, to which he declined. I didn't argue as I didn't want to become over-controlling as I had during our last experience, and because Isaiah seemed to be having a bit more intense of a time than me, although he was still very much enjoying himself and was constantly laughing and making commentary on the game. I decided to wander around the room and explore my perception of the physical world. The police sirens in-game were mildly irritating, but not anything I couldn't ignore. The changed perception I had of physical objects weren't nearly as intense or entertaining as the visuals I was getting from the TV. From my experience, the physical world only begins to have true enhancement and distortion and becomes absolutely stunning beyond the level and eighth of shrooms in the 900 to 1200 range for 25i. It felt as though everything was absolutely hilarious, and when I wandered over to my desktop, I found a picture of a stack of my friend. Well, more ex-friends. Him and I aren't close anymore due to moral differences. Ian. This existed because a little more than a year previous to this trip, Ian had been diagnosed with severe pancreatic and bone cancer, as well as mild brain cancer. When I went to an awareness/charity walk for cancer the summer previous to the trip, the team representing Ian had carried these little signs with his face on them. For some reason, I found the picture of my bald, chemo-treated friend extremely humorous and burst out laughing as I picked it up. Isaiah looked up to see what I was laughing at. I showed him the picture of my ailing friend, and he too began laughing. Soon we were both in hysterics to the point of crying. He then said, "Was that from Halloween? You be all like, 'Trick or treat, I'm Ian and I got fucking cancer.'" We both continued laughing manically for a few minutes, until I was able to talk and explain the reasoning for this morbid face on a stick. By the way, Ian had a miraculous remission from his cancer, smile, despite both the majority of his doctors and family/friends being fairly certain that he wouldn't make it, to the point where he was even granted a wish by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. 12:50 a.m. We were no longer playing GTA at this point, and we were mainly conversing about how much we were enjoying the experience. as well as the visual activity we were experiencing, which seemed to still be glowing. I decided to turn on the playlist I had created earlier, which mainly consisted of electronic music, light R&B, Frank Ocean and The Weeknd, some indie rock, and some prog metal. However, the first song on the playlist didn't really fit with the trippiness of the rest of the playlist. I just put it on there because it sounded cool, and the music of both the artists is normally greatly enhanced by general intoxication. The song was Wild for the Night by A$AP Rocky and Skrillex. I didn't want to be too loud, so I had the music at a low volume, leaving it not very enjoyable as I couldn't hear a strong bass or the details of the song that would normally be very enhanced at this point in a trip. Isaiah said the song was giving him bad vibes, so I turned the music off while we continued to talk and also looked through our school yearbook for a bit. 1 a.m. Focus was once again aimed towards the Xbox, as Isaiah and I began playing a 2D independent game called I Made a Game of Zombies in It. The game takes place from a bird's eye view as the players use their analog sticks to move and fire various weapons that can be picked up on the ground at enemies that include, but are not limited to, zombies. It includes some very energized, albeit god-awful, music, along with flashing lights, lasers, patterns, and colors that make the game quite the visual experience even while sober. I felt very motivated by the fast-paced game, but we ended up failing miserably at actually playing it, and mostly just watched and enjoyed the visuals that it provided. 1:20 a.m. It seems as though we had reached the peak. We stopped playing the game and I convinced Isaiah that we should watch something. I suggest Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but he says that it seems too confusing and dark to watch while tripping, plus he said he didn't really get the movie last time we watched it. We were both on dextroamphetamine and cannabis that night. I really wanted him to watch it since I knew that the movie didn't fully click for me until I watched it while tripping, but I knew we should be doing something we both enjoy. We talk about the other movies I had put on the Xbox earlier, which included Avatar, the new Alice in Wonderland, the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and the SpongeBob movie. All of them seemed too dark except for Avatar, which I thought was too long and hard to follow, and didn't have a relevant message to either of our lives at the time. I turned on Netflix to find something. 1:40 a.m. We decided to watch Adventure Time. It seemed happy, easy to follow, and trippy enough for both of us to agree on. 1:44 a.m. We each dropped a quarter tab, 300 UGs, of 25I-NBOMe and started the first episode. 2 a.m. The visuals had gained a major boost, along with our mood. Adventure Time looked absolutely out of this world. The expressions on the characters' faces were all ridiculously exaggerated, and the world the show takes place in seemed to jump out of the screen at us. We were non-stop laughing and making comments and jokes about what was going on. The trip was absolutely wonderful. 2:20 a.m. People tend to bash the NBOMes, especially 25I, for not being spiritual or insightful. I agree that there is zero spirituality to this drug, especially in comparison to psilocin. However, for me, and it seemed for Isaiah as well, 25I has the ability to open the mind to wonderful self-realizations, insight on the way humans and society behave and interact, and a blatant perspective on the way the world runs. It doesn't provide the epic cosmic feelings and ideas that shrooms or the dissociative DXM do, but it has a knack for changing/advancing one's perspective on things relevant to modern humans. Adventure Time seemed packed full of messages and metaphors that we were able to understand, but also oversimplify while explaining them to each other, as expressing ideas in language feels very insufficient and limited on 25I, and communication can be difficult and confusing. For example, the main character, Finn, often seemed fairly useless without his companion, Jake the dog. Isaiah commented on this by saying, "You can either be a magical, shape-shifting dog, or you can be a useless fuckboy companion, but that's life." 2:30 a.m. The visuals were still increasing. Isaiah noted that my basement ceiling, which has white bums painted on, like many ceilings, looked like a bunch of rice. I saw what he meant, but it didn't stand out to me. I suddenly realized that the patterns on the carpet had turned from mostly unchanging silhouettes of animals to shifting geometric shapes. The pattern strongly resembled snowflakes and seemed to be about an inch or two above the carpet until I laid down on it and it blended back in. This pattern/visual has occurred a few times during other 25I experiences. Isaiah saw snowflake patterns in the carpet at this point as well. The color shifting had dramatically increased, and I compared the colors of 25I to magic mushrooms. It seemed that while tripping on psilocin, the RGB, red, green, and blue, colors in my vision were distorted and enhanced, while 25I seemed to work on CYMK, cyan, yellow, magenta, and key. The distortion black/key in my visual field would explain the apparent increase in color contrast that I was experiencing. Tracers had gone quite strong and tended to be a bright purple/magenta. Isaiah stated that he felt great sympathy for some of the characters in Adventure Time and their hardships, so he too was experiencing an apathogenic-like effect. 2:50 a.m. Isaiah and I had been laughing and yelling at Adventure Time. He realized that we were probably being too loud and voiced his concern. One of the things I had been a controlling asshole about on our last trip was the volume he was speaking at, and not wanting to repeat any of that experience, I told him that we were fine, but we could turn the TV down and try to be quieter if he'd be more comfortable. He said he was alright, and we continued watching. 3:10 a.m. It seemed we had reached the second peak from the redose. The whole room looked as though it was melting and shifting towards the TV. The walls have huge amount of static and sort of dots, and looked to be shaking. The geometry on the ceiling and carpet was impossible to miss. I found myself utterly lost in the show, yet couldn't follow the plot of the episode going on. 3:40 a.m. An episode of Adventure Time ended, but the autoplay on Netflix turned off. Isaiah and I had been taking time to talk during the 20-second breaks between the episodes, and didn't realize that we had to manually play the next episode, so we talked for a while. I was tripping balls and was beyond high, but found my thought process completely clear, and not all mixed up and nonsensical like the come-up of 25I. This is an interesting thing I've noticed about the chemical, that around half an hour into the peak, the trip seems to change to be much clearer in thought process, loses most body load, and the visuals change to have much more distortion of color, enhancing of vision, much stronger tracers, and slightly less fractals and patterns. I've heard others who have experienced this chemical and experienced the same change in their trip say that they believe 25I-NBOMe has an active metabolite or more than one because of the clarity after the 2 to 3 hour mark post-administration. I asked Isaiah if he wants to go on a walk outside. Again, I had asked the same question an hour or so earlier, but the trip was too hectic for him to go to an unfamiliar place. He said that he wanted to, and we began preparing to leave. 4 a.m. Just as we were ready to step outside through my basement window, we heard the basement door open. My brain began going into overdrive, and it was impossible to gather my thoughts despite being completely level-headed just seconds before this. I began panicking because I thought my dad would know we were tripping, despite there being no evidence of drug use. I'd like to mention that although I am legally responsible for myself, my parents don't want me doing drugs, and definitely not doing/having them in the house, but they are aware that I am a drug user. I was already on thin ice with my parents due to my mom thinking she smelled weed in my room the previous day, so this situation was quite stressful. Isaiah and I had exchanged a look as we heard someone walking down the stairs, and he proceeded to hug his knees while I pretended I was showing him something on my laptop so there would be a reason that he was sitting directly next to me. My dad appeared at the entrance to the room. I was flipping out in my head, but all I had to say as his morphing face came into view was, "Hey." He then said, "Guys, it's 4 in the morning and you're being way too loud. You should go to bed." My terrified thoughts came to a halt, as did all other thoughts, as the next thing I did was hold up a bag of flaming hot Cheetos to him and say, "It's just Cheetos, man." I'm guessing he was too tired to register that Isaiah was in a fetal position next to me. I randomly handed him a bag of Cheetos, and our eyes were dilated as fuck as he said, "I'm trying to sleep, please shut off the Xbox and go to bed." Suddenly logic shot back into my mind, and I said, We will soon. Sorry. Then he said goodnight to us, we said goodnight to him, and he went back upstairs. Isaiah and I were silent while staring at each other for a minute, and then he asked, "Did that really just happen?" I told him it did, but he didn't know we were tripping. We both agreed that we were way too anxious to go on a walk now, and decided to keep watching Adventure Time. Of course, our recently shocked selves forgot to turn down the volume. 4:15 a.m. My dad comes down again, this time angry, and demands we turn the TV off. I immediately oblige, turn the lights off, and then both lay down on our places on the couch. We're quiet for a couple of minutes other than our laughter, which we're both muffling with the pillows. Then we gain the confidence to start talking, but definitely weren't going to turn on the TV. Isaiah announced how bored he was, at which point I realized that I felt very unstimulated as well and turned on my DS to play some Pokemon. 4:30 a.m. We began talking, which quickly grew more interesting than the game. I began trying to discuss philosophy and ideology with Isaiah. It was difficult to assess the vocabulary I normally use, but the conversation quickly began flowing. I consider Isaiah to be just as intelligent as I am. In fact, he is probably more intelligent than me, but I feel that I have a much more enlightened perspective of the world and life. One of the reasons I encouraged Isaiah to experiment with psychedelics is because of how much capacity he has for great thinking and how much I know psychedelics have improved my thought process and understanding of myself, others, and the universe. Not to sound arrogant, I know that I am not nearly as close to knowing the ways of the world as others. I read him a Democritus quote, hoping that it would spark a thought process of self-realization. All that exists are atoms and empty space. Everything else is opinion. What this quote means to me is that the only fact of life is matter and the emptiness between existing matter. All statements, this element is AG or silver, I know God exists, North Korea is an evil dictatorship, that planet is called Mars, etc., are merely ideas created by self-awareness consciousnesses, labels, and titles given by sentient beings to objects, events, places, and people, when on a larger scale, people's thoughts about life really don't matter in the universe and have no bearing on how the universe runs. Also, just because a combination of atoms and molecules happen to let our consciousnesses exist doesn't mean that we're any more special than other matter in the world, seeing as our thoughts and beliefs don't mean shit to the physical world, and that it wouldn't matter if you ruled the whole earth, because existence wouldn't stop for you for a second. After I explained how I felt about the quote, Isaiah didn't speak for a moment and then exclaimed, "Fuck Democritus, man. That's lame as fuck." I was surprised by this response, since he usually appreciates intellectual exchange. I was confused. What? Why? Isaiah explained that if the statement is completely true, then there's no purpose to existing as a self-awaring being. I pondered that, and I guess that's a way to look at it, but I think the complete self-awareness, awareness of the world surrounding you, along with a complete expansion of consciousness, can make a being have meaning in the universe. I mean, if everything except for atoms and empty space is opinion, at least I'm still made out of atoms, which means I'm still a functioning portion of the universe. I kept these last thoughts to myself, as I don't think Isaiah's philosophy matches up with mine. Of course, both our beliefs are just opinion that don't mean anything in the long run, but it's comforting to understand, or think you understand, some piece of life. 4:40 a.m. I decided to get up and go use the bathroom. I am still having heavy visuals, and the bathroom looks completely foreign. While in there, I saw a bug, I believe an ant, on the ground near my feet. My usual response would be to kill the insect, as I have a strong, irrational fear of them, but as I looked at the small creature, I realized that I don't have the right to end life, even if the same matter would exist after the bug's body stops working. Its limited, but still existing, consciousness would cease to be, which is something that I felt would make me cruel without reason other than fear. 4:45 a.m. The situation in the bathroom led to a couple different thought processes which I shared with Isaiah once I was back in the basement. The first was that any living creature's primary goal is to continue its existence, then to reproduce in order to replicate its existence. This is evident in many plants, as most simply grow as much as their resources allow them, but don't make an effort to change their environment in order to continue living. An oak tree won't suddenly become malleable when 90-mile-per-hour winds begin hitting it. Its trunk will simply snap. A living creature can become conscious. There is a wide range level of consciousnesses, which leads them trying to improve its existence. This can be seen in many animals, such as birds building its nest in a place where a hungry predator can't consume it or its eggs, or in an animal such as a deer as it runs to try to escape a pack of wolves. The next level is self-awareness. This is most easily seen in humans. The body is simply a motor built in order to sustain consciousness, and humans know that at one point their body will expire. So in order to try and keep their consciousnesses alive, they try to extend their will, beliefs, and cultures onto others, just as I am sharing my beliefs right now, and did with Isaiah. It's the most advanced and also the most destructive attempt at self-preservation on Earth. It's why religions and cultures push against each other, even to the point of violence. It's why people create governments, to make their beliefs into laws that are supposed to maintain a certain way of life. It's why there's a set curriculum for teachers to use in public schools. It's to instill the information that school boards, the Department of Education, etc. think is valuable into the minds of the youth. Isaiah seemed to agree with me on these ideas, although he said that the social contract, giving up certain freedoms for protection, is also a big reason for government. But I digress. I would feel much safer walking the streets with my own handgun on me than if a stereotyping fat police officer were driving around in a police cruiser looking for people committing crimes like speeding and possessing narcotics rather than stopping crimes like domestic violence, murder, child abuse, and rape. Law enforcement doesn't protect people from becoming victims of evil. It only, and not very often, statistically, prosecutes those who have committed crimes, victimless or not. A cop won't stop me from getting mugged in North Minneapolis at 3 in the morning. They'll just take the description of the criminal, find some suspects, and possibly punish the correct person for whatever they done. I didn't say this to him either, since if he does ever end up sharing these beliefs with me, it will be out of self-realization and insight, not me telling him what to think or what I think. 5 a.m. We decided that it's safe to turn Adventure Time back on as long as we kept the volume low and ourselves quiet. I am still peeking, but I have remarkable control over my thoughts. As we turn the show and the lights back on, the visuals are once again very intense, but in a good way. Isaiah and I go back on our commentary on each episode, just much quieter. This goes on for a couple of hours, but with us also doing stuff on our computers and discussing how much our status among other human beings is decided by chance and not at all our own will. 6 a.m. While watching Adventure Time, the sun begins rising. The sky is blue and gold and shockingly beautiful. I tell myself that next time I do a psychedelic should be during the daytime, and that I'll have to make an effort to spend time outside. 7 a.m. Coming down quite a bit now. Visuals are still strong, but the world doesn't look completely alien and covered in distortions to me. The blinds continue to breathe, but not as heavily. The ceiling and carpet still have obviously visible patterns on them, but they don't rise from the ground and shift constantly like before. Colors are still a little brighter and still have higher contrast than usual, but I'm not getting the extreme tracers that I was. 7:30 a.m. We hear the basement door open and my dad comes downstairs, I think to grab something from the freezer, but instead sees us awake and watching TV. At first I wasn't worried at all because I could act sober if I didn't get flustered like before, but then my dad walks over to the still awake Isaiah and I. His face still shifting and morphing, and says in a very negative, angry tone, "You guys never slept, did you?" I told him that I did for a couple of hours, and Isaiah said that he didn't sleep. Now most of my friends dislike my dad, and for a good reason. He gets really bitchy when people don't follow his orders, and he doesn't have any perspective on how his actions impact others' well-being. He's often had my friends leave the house for very unimportant reasons or not let them come over when their presence would have no impact on him. Now, all of these undesirable traits are amplified tenfold when he's tired or has recently woke up. My dad stared at us in silence for a while we both sat awkwardly. There were incredibly bad vibes emanating from him. He then said, "Isaiah, you ready to go home?" Isaiah looked confused and said, "I guess?" I didn't understand at all. Then my dad said, "Okay, I'm going to drive you home." Isaiah responded, alright? I realized what my dad was doing and became extremely angry. I interjected, "Whoa, what?" My dad said that he would go and grab his shoes and his keys and that Isaiah should come up when he was ready. Now, I never yell at either of my parents or personally insult them or curse at them, but I was not there to let my friend feel like a bitch because my dad was being a douchebag. "What the fuck? Why are you being so pissy?" My dad looked shocked momentarily and then yelled, "Because you guys wouldn't sleep!" Isaiah just stared at his computer screen, trying to stay out of what was going on. I yelled, "Well, holy shit, shoot me because I didn't fucking sleep. Because you have control over when my body naturally decides it's tired. We'll fucking sleep, but you're not taking anyone home." My dad stared at me for a while. I glared back. He eventually turned around and walked upstairs. I apologized to Isaiah about my dad's temper tantrum. He told me that he texted his sister for a ride and that she'd be here in 10 minutes. I was surprised initially, but realized that if I were a guest at this house, that I would not want to be there. I helped him gather his stuff quickly and then walk towards the stairs and go up towards the bathroom. My dad was standing at the top of the stairs, facing away. I stared for a few seconds and then said, why are you standing there?" He turned around. "I don't know. Why am I standing here?" "I don't know." Then I walked up the stairs and we argued for a while. At first, the unfamiliar part of the house reminded me that I was still tripping a fair amount and made me lose my ability to think properly, and so I stuttered for a few seconds, trying to find words. I recovered my composure though and told him that his reaction to his son and his son's friend not sleeping when he wanted to was completely disproportionate, and that there's no way that a guest simply not sleeping caused for him to kick them out of the house. I then told him that Isaiah was leaving in a few minutes because he was so uncomfortable. Isaiah's sister must have told him that she was at my house because he began walking up my steps to leave. At which point, my dad told Isaiah he has nothing against him and that this whole situation wasn't about him at all. I just shook my head at his weak apology and said bye to Isaiah as he walked away from us towards my front door. My dad then apologized to me for treating my friend that way, and for acting that way in front of a friend of mine. I stared at him. I didn't think he was actually serious because there was no way he expected some sort of acceptance of his apology after the way he acted. He then went on to do something I didn't expect, and apologized for a time back when I was only 15 years old, and got home from a Halloween event at 2 in the morning, and he shoved me up against the door and hit me because I was home so late. I know, he's actually a dick. I was surprised he remembered this since he treats me like shit more often. I stared at him for a few more seconds and then walked up to my room and fell asleep until 1 in the afternoon. He's apologized a couple more times for acting that way towards Isaiah since then, but I don't think he'll get forgiveness from me for making one of my best friends feel that unwelcome and humiliated. Isaiah and my friendship is still very much intact, but I'm not sure he'll ever want to come to my house again. I know that this was an incredibly long trip report, but it was about a lot more than just the drug. I learned a lot from both the trip itself and the events that took place during the trip. Never let someone fuck you or the people you care about around, even if they act like they love you and are doing what's best for you, because love and care is shown through kindness, not through anger. I'm not saying don't forgive these people, that was just my personal choice. Perhaps I will forgive my dad for that night. Maybe I'll also forgive him for the night where he hit me as my friends were still pulling out of my driveway. Only time will tell. I just know that I'm not forgiving him anytime soon. I also know that I need to find the means to leave this house because my parents letting me stay here has allowed them to control me too much. And everyone is naturally a bad person. Our instincts in modern culture have taught us to only care about ourselves and even to try and control others. I know that I am a bad person too, and that it would take me years for me to truly learn to care about others as much as, and hopefully more than myself eventually. I realized that it was a bad choice on my part to trip in such an unstable environment, but there's nothing I can do about it now. If anyone cares about the effects of the drug, although it's a stimulant, it's barely impacted my heart rate, although it did cause noticeable vasoconstriction as my extremities became rather cold and a little numb after Isaiah and I redosed. The drug has no noticeable body load at medium doses such as 600 UGs, except for some gastrointestinal distress, mostly in the form of flatulence, probably due to serotonin receptors in the intestines. I noticed some nausea after redosing and bringing myself to a 900 UG dose. Remember, everyone has a sweet spot for having a comfortable, enjoyable time on any given drug. And I'm going to say for this substance, it's probably not above 1 milligram for most people. Also, I had to piss like 6 or 7 times during the trip, which tells me that this drug is at least slightly toxic, as my body seemed to be attempting to flush it out. However, 25I-NBOMe feels no more toxic to me than alcohol, nicotine, or amphetamine, and it has never left me with a hangover or pains in the kidney, liver, or heart, so my guess is that it doesn't do any long-term damage to the body. These opinions aren't backed up by any statistics or data though, so don't take my word for it. If it's your first time doing 25I, start low. I mean anywhere between 300 UG and 600 UG depending on your weight, tolerance to psychedelics, and experience with tripping. I believe that with careful dosing, in good setting and company, this is one of the more enjoyable drugs I've done. Anyways, thank you for listening, if you did listen all the way through.